So today we're talking about meth. And yes, the background looks a little bit like a crack den, but we're in a warehouse, so we're just rolling with it. So most people think beating meth is about willpower or just staying clean for a couple of days. But in my experience, that is what sets people up for failure in a really quick and simple way. So today we're going to talk about what are the real strategies to turn it around from meth addiction and what you can do to achieve long-term recovery and beat those first early, really challenging days where everything feels impossible. So let's get into it. Now, I don't know how long this video is going to go for because I'm actually going to talk a little bit about my story about meth, which I feel a little bit vulnerable about because I do talk to camera a lot, but I talk about recovery strategies and haven't talked about my story for a long time. And it makes me feel a little bit nervous and icky to think back about some of those dirty days using meth and eventually injecting meth. Quick note, shouldn't use the word dirty because I hate the word clean because it implies that you were dirty and you were never dirty. You were just stuck in a cycle of addiction and struggling with underlying psychological and emotional issues, and the cycle of addiction got out of control. The way that we talk to ourselves is so important. So if you, in my opinion, if you're telling yourself clean, you're implying that you are dirty at some stage, and that's just not a positive and healthy way to look at yourself. All right, back to the video. So meth started for me after actually using a lot of speed. That was over 13 years ago now, and back then speed was on the market in Australia. I don't know what it's like around the rest of the world, but you can't get speed anymore. It's all meth. But back when I was using methamphetamine, you could get some speed, and that's how I started. I was smoking a lot of speed. Now, another side note to this video, I'm not going to get into all the scientific details about meth. I am going to put a link to some research that I was involved in, which is called Cracks in the Ice, which is a government-formed research website that has all the in-depth details about methamphetamine, and it's really helpful if you want to know the ins and outs of the scientific stuff about how meth is formulated and all that kind of stuff, and the different types of meth and the different types of amphetamines and all that sort of jazz. So I'll put that link to that in the show notes. So I was smoking speed. Things in my life were kind of a bit out of control. But I was holding it together. I had a job, I was going to the pub most weekends, having fun, drinking, smoking speed. Smoking speed had moved over a little bit into the weekdays, but it wasn't every week that I was doing that. It was mainly just like big weekend benders or long weekend benders from Friday to Mondays. Up all night having a good time. I was young, about 17, 18, that sort of age, 19, I think. I can't even remember exactly the age I first took meth, but I can remember the exact time. So that exact time was outside a pub, and we were smoking what I thought was speed, until someone passed me the pipe and said, "Have a puff of this, it's ice." To be honest, I was really scared. Every time I used a new drug, I actually felt really scared of what might happen. But inevitably, when I used the drug, I always usually loved it and then wanted to use it time and time again. And that's what happened to meth. I smoked it out of a pipe and it absolutely blew my head off, and I absolutely loved it. And that set off a chain where I just used it so frequently, and it turned into an everyday addiction. So some of the key things about me with meth is that it's not really about the high, it's about the crash or avoiding the crash. Yes, I love the high, but once I was addicted and in that space, I would try and do everything I could to avoid the crash, because the depression and the dark places that I went to were so heavy and desperate that it really destroyed my life. I might mention as well, as I said at the start of the video, I actually started using meth intravenously. I started shooting up meth, which when that started to happen, that completely blew my life apart and destroyed it. It took me to the next level and I couldn't handle it. I really started deteriorating into that really stereotypical cycle of addiction and stereotypical drug user that you might see displayed in movies and stuff like that. So I look a little bit fat around the face now, but when I checked into rehab from injecting meth, I was gaunt and skinny, believe it or not. So I'm 6'6" and I weighed 65 kilos. So I was incredibly light. They put me on meal supplement replacements to try and beef me up a little bit. I was young. I was getting psychosis all the time. I was muttering to myself walking down the street, thinking other people were talking about me. It was just a horrible, horrible existence and experience. I might also mention, along with using meth came other drugs into the mix to try and kind of like combat the effects of meth, which really fucked up my life as well. The main one being Xanax, which I'll put a link to a video if you're watching on YouTube about somebody's story with Xanax. But anything that ever really bad happened to me in my life happened on Xanax. So Xanax was a big one for me, smoking pot, taking antipsychotic medication to try and like make me come down off meth. Stuff like that was just really prevalent. A lot of alcohol, anything I could use as a depressant to sort of calm me down when I was coming down, which I thought was calming me down, but in a lot of ways was actually just making me more depressed and putting me in a darker hole and in a darker place. So a trigger warning, because of the come downs of meth, I actually tried to take my life a couple of times. I'm not going to go too far into it because I actually find it too hard to talk about now that I reflect on it, because I nearly died a couple of times, like for real. And I was just really lucky. At the time, I didn't feel like I was lucky because I was in such a dark place. The come down on meth is brutal, and I really want to highlight that in this video for people using, because everybody talks about the high, but so many people don't talk about like what comes up must come down, and you come down hard when you're using a lot of meth. So just to mention the one other thing that people might relate to, which I really hated, which is really like kind of disgusting when I think about it, and when I reflect on it, I hate it and it makes me feel icky. But when you're using intravenously and shooting up meth, get dehydrated quickly, and after a couple of shots, like if you're not drinking enough water and stuff like that, which I wasn't, because I was just so disorganized and fucking out of control and dehydrated all the time, it was really hard to get a vein, and I'd miss all the time, and get massive welts and bruises in my arm and stuff like that. Like, and it was just a kind of a disgusting like experience, and fed into this whole like guilt and shame cycle that I had. And I was just, to iterate, I was just in a really, really dark place. So for me, what happened was that, the quick story, I'll tell it in a longer version in another video, because I don't want this video to be too long, but I had a massive bender. I had lots of rock bottoms that changed it all for me, and that's what happens to a lot of people. You know, there's no one rock bottom that is going to fix it. They just give you windows of opportunity to jump through if you take it in that moment, and I did with this one. But basically I went back to my mum. She let me in the house, she kicked me out. I looked in the mirror and I kind of saw myself, and it sounds really cliche, but my life flashed before my eyes, and I saw myself as what I used to be, as a happy-go-lucky guy that had everything going for him, playing sport, all that kind of stuff, to your stereotypical like drug user that was pretty broken at that time and stuck in a rut. And in that moment, it just broke me, and I asked for help. I feel really lucky that I had awesome family support. They looked up rehabs and they had it all ready to go for me. And I was into rehab within a week from that period of time on. So what happened in rehab was, in the first instant and in the first bit, I was still experiencing like the paranoia from the meth use, and I thought everybody was like talking about me in the rehab, and it was just this, like, I can remember the first week to 2 weeks of that rehab just being absolutely torturous, because I was so paranoid and I was really scared, because I thought I'd done like long-term damage to my brain, and I thought that I might be stuck like that for the rest of my life, and that was like freaking me out. And the rehab that I went to, unfortunately, they didn't give me a lot of like medication to help me come down and support me. So the effects of that were like really torturous. And I really look back on that experience as one of the hardest times of my life. For me, it's a good news story. I was able to turn my life around from that point on. I talk a lot about now how 12 steps aren't the go for everybody, and some of the problems with 12 steps, but I must admit, 12 steps are awesome because they saved my life at that time. I got involved in 12-step meetings, and the characters and the people in that place really took care of me and really helped me to change my life. And without that, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today doing this video, telling you about my addiction and the way that I turned it around. So there you go, all you 12-steppers that I've been making videos about. Don't hate me. I love the 12 steps. They saved my life and they really helped me. Transitioning from there, here are my tips for the early recovery stages of meth addiction and meth recovery. The first one is sleep as much as you can and get like medical support and medical help to get some medications to help you come down and help you facilitate that sleeping process. You want to rest and restore as much as you can. Using meth is like borrowing money on a credit card with time. You kind of borrow that time and that lack of sleep and energy and all that stuff on a credit card. And when you come off, it all comes back to roost and bring you down. So sleeping as much as you can is super important, but I must highlight, get medical support, medical help to do that. What I found for me, because the come down was so bad and I was in such a dark place in that come down, things like journaling and thinking about what I was grateful for was like super important, really helped me to just combat that depression a little bit. Now, most people find that really annoying because it's kind of advice that everybody gives on YouTube, and the wellness crowd have like hijacked it and all that stuff. But it is really helpful in those early days just to think about the things that you really are grateful for in your life and that bring meaning and that you care about, whether it's kids, family, work stuff, passions, things about yourself that you like, things about other people you like, people that have been there for you. There's heaps of stuff. There's things that you can find gratitude for. Things that I did was actually like compare myself to somebody that like had cancer or something like that, and just kind of go, wow, like I'm fucking in a tough place and I'm struggling, but imagine what this person's going through. I'm grateful that I'm, only experiencing this addiction and there's a way out and there's a solution for me. So there's always something that you can find gratitude for. And it's really important to try as hard as you can to find those things in early recovery, to combat that depression, because you do feel really low in those early days. So for me, something that was huge was finding like purpose and meaning. Now, I know that sounds like such a huge thing to think about when you're fucked. But really trying to take your mind off what's going on in the present and thinking about a future that's exciting really helped me to just kind of break free of that initial phase of depression and anxiety that I was going through. So thinking about what your life could look like 6 or 12 months from where you are right in that spot can be really helpful as well. And actually writing down some of those goals. I've seen some really cool stuff on social media, which I did it because it goes viral. But people making like video diaries of themselves when they're fucked and feeling like shit and saying that they're going to do this, this, and this, and then like actually going on to achieve it. And I really believe in that process of like manifestation, maybe not in like a spiritual way, but just in a way where you program your brain to move towards that goal. By just reiterating it to yourself all the time. So again, if you can take yourself out of that misery and try and train your brain to focus on the future and things that are exciting in your life, and have people around you that reinforce that and remind you of that, it can be really helpful to creating a new life and a new way of thinking and living and acting for a better future. Okay, I know I'm giving really simple tips, things that you probably heard before, but when you put all these things together, I found that they were just really helpful. Some form of exercise. It doesn't have to be extreme. For me, it was just going for a walk. Like once I kind of went through that sleep stage, I just had so much like energy, and my mind was like kind of all over the place, you know, like it just felt like scattered, my head. And going for a walk really gave me like some clarity and some time to think. And that's what really like any like substance use is about, particularly methamphetamine use. It's about escaping reality and just kind of forgetting about whatever's going on, and really not like feeling what's going on inside your body and processing emotions and stuff like that. So like movement and learning how to be with yourself is really important. And that was really important for me in those early stages, was just going for a walk and like clearing my head, and, you know, kind of coming back into myself and getting my thoughts back together, which then transitioned into a little bit more extreme exercise. And that stuff fluctuated throughout my recovery and has fluctuated throughout my recovery. But when I am exercising and moving my body and all that kind of stuff, I find that is almost like a better form of mindfulness than just like sitting still. So I did promise at the start some strategies that would determine long-term success with this stuff. And what that really about for me is, or what that really was about for me, was shifting my identity. And I kind of got a bit lost with it at the start, just from the stream of recovery that I fell into. It really helped me, but it really hindered me in other ways. But I want to tell you that you're not an addict. You're somebody that's on a healing journey, that's on a learning experience, and taking on that identity of somebody that's always learning and changing and growing, and discovering what your values and principles are and living in accordance to those values and principles is really the strategy for long-term success. Because if you start living in accordance to your values and principles, and you start doing that on a daily basis, and you start reminding yourself around how you actually lived in accordance to those values and principles, it starts to build positive self-esteem and self-worth. Because everybody that I've ever met in addiction struggles from a lack of self-worth and self-esteem. And if you think about it, that is true, because you wouldn't put like poison in your body if you felt good about yourself. You would, you know, I know that's probably controversial to some people, but you would like treat yourself in better ways. So what I found works the best for people for a long-term strategy to shift from any addiction, not just meth, but particularly I find it works well for meth, coupled with finding a purpose and changing your life in that fashion, is living in accordance with your values and principles. And when you do that, you start to kind of believe and have more evidence in your life that you're a good person and that things can change, and that you've changed. And that then filters into your attitude and your outlook upon life, which then filters into your decision making and your behaviors and your actions, which then results in better outcomes in your life. So finding out who you are, or what I'd rather say is creating who you are through discovering what your values are and creating what your principles are and living in accordance to those, builds that self-esteem and that self-worth, and builds long-term success from overcoming meth addiction in the long term. Because you're not fighting the meth, you're fighting the underlying pain. And when you go on that healing journey and you go through like some therapy to discover what that pain is, and then you change and live in accordance to your values and principles, success starts to become real for you, and you start to create a new reality, and things start to get exciting in your life, and it just builds and it starts to snowball. And instead of snowballing in the wrong direction, which was what happens with meth, you get in this negative cycle of guilt and shame and regret and all this stuff, and you snowball in the wrong direction. You get in this positive direction of excitement, and like, yeah, just happiness and peace and contentment, and that all starts to snowball in the right direction. So living in accordance to those values and principles is incredibly important. And you know, like having the right support around you. Now, that's an oversimplification. There's lots of other stuff that goes into it around it. which is too much to cover in this one video, which is why we have a whole program where we take people through like a coaching process over 60 days or 6 months to actually discover all this stuff and go on this healing journey. But for the purpose of this video, like if you can take away for long-term success, use some of those short-term strategies and take away the values and principles and changing your identity and start to look into that through other YouTube videos or other places, or engaging us or whatever it is, you're going to start to build the foundations of a long-term successful recovery, and things will change in your life. All right. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some insight on meth. Don't be too hard on me in the comments. I got a little bit vulnerable with my story, feeling a little bit weird about it, but I'm excited to hear the feedback on this video and I hope it helped. Have a good day, everybody. Peace.